Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the final modern slavery seminar as part of the Anti-Slavery Day, which is today. Thank you, everyone, for calling in, and also those that have been participating throughout the week. My name is Jason Grove. I'm the Modern Slavery Coordinator as part of the National Modern Slavery Police Transformation Team. Today, we've got a fantastic array of speakers that are accumulating from what we've had all throughout the week, spotting the early signs right the way through to internet-enabled criminality, homelessness links, and a lot more. So today we've got looking at the victim pathway and every contact counts. So what we're going to do is have a number of excellent speakers talking, and hopefully you'll come up with lots of good questions that you can record and send through. And before you sign off at the very end, I'd just like to see if you could complete the 2 simple question polls so we can get some feedback on the event. So what I'd like to do now is hand over to the first speaker, and have a great morning. Thank you
all. I'm Chair and Exec Director of the West Midlands Anti-Slavery Network. I'm also independent consultant. First of all, I'd just like to say thanks very much for Public Health England and Police Transformation Programme. I'm told, and it's been an absolutely fabulous week, and I've seen the feedback, and it's been absolutely amazing. So I've also been told that the week has gone extremely smoothly, so I feel under some pressure here. But so my first, I'm on for 15 minutes, and for the first few minutes, I'm just going to speak about multi-agency partnerships. I think partnerships and working with multiple agencies, it's something that we often read about. We've read about it in the Home Office strategy, for example, and it's often talked about, but probably what was recognised or has been recognised is that there's actually no clear definition for that. It very much is down to organisations and regions to identify the need for a partnership and to kind of work out for themselves what should be done. And I think going forward, there needs to be some clarity around that. And I'll come on to that in a moment, because Nottingham University, the Rights Lab, has done an extremely good piece of work on mapping toolkits and also some key recommendations. But the West Midlands Anti-Slavery Network started 10 years ago. In fact, it's our 10-year anniversary now this year. And it was started by a Methodist Church project, which was called Adavu. And Adavu still exists now and does some extremely good work with post-NRM care and support for victims. And it was back in 2009 that Adavu had a conference, because the Adavu project was originally set up to look at human trafficking in the West Midlands, which was kind of extremely forward-thinking of them, because, as most people will know, that's when the National Referral Mechanism actually came into being. They had a conference, over 100 people attended, and I think it was at that stage that they saw that the need to work in partnership with other organisations. And their intention at the time was to be quite victim-focused and victim-centred. But I think the problem going back then was that they needed the other agencies, especially the first responder organisations, including local authorities and law enforcement, that they actually needed to do their bit in terms of identifying victims, so that Adavu could then go on and provide care and support. I think initially they saw that there was probably a lack of awareness on human trafficking, and even a lack of awareness of actually being first responders within those organisations and statutory sector organisations. So the first thing was to raise awareness, and they thought that perhaps may take a couple of years, but in fact it actually took a lot longer. But what was formed was the West Midlands Anti-Slavery Network, and the organisation has been supported by a National Crime Agency and the Crown Prosecution Service, and hosted by them for many years, which was hugely appreciated. And so they linked in with the police, statutory sector organisations, but most importantly the third sector. I think the third sector are probably pretty much underrated in terms of their contribution to the work on human trafficking and modern slavery and exploitation, as we speak of now. So the network used to meet every 6 weeks, and I joined them in 2012, and I kind of had come from a law enforcement background myself and kind of brought that element to it. And as we went along, it was hard to get buy-in, first of all, but the numbers of the network grew and grew. We did always used to say that, if it ever was just the three of us sat around the table, that either our work was done or that we were almost barking up the wrong tree, but the numbers have grown. And in fact, we've met practically every 6 to 8 weeks for the past 10 years. And of course, we know that in 2015, the Modern Slavery Act came into being, and that changed everything, really. And that's when we kind of realized here in the West Midlands that West Midlands Anti-Slavery Network and perhaps the police at the time were really the main organizations that were doing anything, but there was no governance, no structure, no oversight, and in particular, no funding. And so about 4 years ago, we formed a task group, and we came up with a strategy and a policy and procedure, which is a pan West Midlands one. And the main part of that was that each local authority would have a partnership, a modern slavery partnership, that then fed into a strategic group. And that is the model that is here in the West Midlands at the moment. That strategic governance group is chaired by Nick Walton, who you've heard speak earlier this week, and the leads from each of the local authority attend that group, and that's how each local authority's partnership feeds into a strategic group, and that's where challenges and trends are spoken about, and that's how issues can be escalated. And I think that model, I personally think, is a good model. I think it's giving responsibility to a local level because, for example, trafficking in Birmingham looks very different to what it does in Solihull. And there are different organisations, particularly third sector. Some third sector organisations exist in some of the areas and some don't. I was looking earlier at a list of police forces in the UK because I was going to speak about the other partnerships that exist in the UK. And as I looked down the list of all the police forces, it kind of dawned on me literally this morning that there is practically a modern slavery partnership in each of the force areas within the UK now. And in Wales, it actually has got its own partnership, which covers the whole of Wales. I think when we speak about partnerships and setting up the partnerships, it's important to take into account the findings by the Notts University Rights Lab, and that is around governance, accountability, scrutiny and funding. And I think it's important that we bear those in mind and identify what partnerships exist, especially the role of other partnerships that already exist, for example, serious and organised crime partnerships, community safety partnerships, and identifying what their roles are in terms of modern slavery and exploitation. I think it's also important to start to contemplate the role of first responders, and I think that's where the multi-agency partnership work links in with my next subject for a few minutes, and that's victim care pathways, and especially having a victim-centered approach. I think just as we get over one hurdle and we think we're on top of things, something else comes up. And for me, I'm constantly learning. I don't think anybody can say they're an expert in this field, and I don't kind of even like that word, but I'm constantly learning, and a subject we've been talking about literally this week is what is the role of a first responder, because you may ask somebody what that is, and the answer may be to complete the NRM form. But then when we look at that further, if you're a local authority, who do we mean as being a first responder in a local authority? Because I think it's hugely unfair, for example, if we were to ask the CEO of a local authority or somebody who collects the waste or refuge collectors to fill it in. So we need to identify who exactly in a first responder organisation is responsible for the completion of the NRM. And it could be that we decide that it is very specific people within the first responder organisation who we train and have that extra knowledge of what the NRM is. And it's also important to take into account, it's more than just filling the form in, of course. it is safeguarding the victim once the NRM has been submitted and we're awaiting the reasonable grounds decision. That is, if the victim wants to go into or consents, if they're an adult, to go into the national referral mechanism. I think it's important for us to have a very clear, identifiable pathway, which is recognizable to all and which everyone has access to. All organizations have access to 24/7. So, for example, if somebody was identified at 10 o'clock on a Friday night, do we actually know who to contact, where the victim would be accommodated overnight, who is going to provide their health, if they need access to a GP, if they've got alcohol, drug, or mental health provision, who will we contact, if they need clothing, if they need food. So having that identifiable pathway, I think, is absolutely essential. And during the week for Anti-Slavery Day, Wolverhampton had a round table exercise, and we had written and constructed a number of very complex case studies for them to work through. And each table had people from different agencies, so you didn't have all police sat on one table. You had a mixture, third sector, local authority, and law enforcement at tables. And what we found there was that nobody actually was able to identify a clear process, but between them all, the knowledge between them all was excellent. Home Office immigration, of course, from their point of view, local authority from their point of view, third sector, law enforcement, etc. When you actually put them all together, they actually were able to resolve some of the issues. And what you also found, that people were passionate. So if somebody had no recourse to public funds, and we were talking about accommodation, they actually were able to find the funding from somewhere, which is, so I think we've come to realize, thankfully, that addressing all the issues of modern slavery is not purely down to law enforcement. It cannot be the case. I think that there is often criticism that we aren't equipped with the correct tools and guidance, but when we start to look at what exists out there, there is an awful lot of published material and a lot of work has been done. So, for example, the Red Cross and ATLU have come up with the principles that underpinned early support for provision of survivors of trafficking. You've also got the Human Trafficking Foundation guidance on victim care and support. And those are essential documents, and it's essential that the advice that's given there actually kicks in at the point of rescue and not at the point of a positive reasonable grounds decision. I've only got a few minutes left, but I do want to go on to my last point, and that's the benefits and challenges of multi-agency approach to victim care and support. And by that I mean speaking about the MARAC process, of which they've got in Wales, and I know that Steve Chapman has implemented that some years ago, and I've always thought that has to be the best way to go. So linking that to multi-agency partnerships, victim care pathway, victim-centered approach. I think at the point of rescue, within 24 hours, 36 hours, it's absolutely essential that there's a multi-agency discussion, or MARAC, or whatever we should call it. And I know that the Passage in London has adapted this, and I understand Nottingham have just adapted this, that discussion takes place. There's nothing that says that an NRM form has to be completed within the first 12 hours. So kind of sticking your head around the door and asking if somebody wants to go into an NRM and they say no, and then that is it, seems to be crazy. I think the person or a victim needs time to relax and to get medical attention and the correct care and support and the kindness, and then we can speak about the NRM at a later date, and when the victim feels ready, and we need to ask the victim what they want to do, because if you put somebody into the NRM too quickly, you're setting them up to fail. If they then go off to Salvation Army care and support provision, and they've got severe drink, drug, or mental health problems, and then they go missing a week later, we have literally failed the victim seriously. And I think that if they do receive the correct care and support, there are better chances of victims perhaps supporting prosecutions or sharing information with the relevant authorities. So I could speak about this for a long time now, but I have to hand over to Karen in one moment. But what I would like to say on the NRM, things are changing literally on a weekly basis. So we've just gone over to digitalization of the NRM. And there's two things I would like to speak mention before I hand over. That's the quality of the national referral mechanism forms. Speaking to our partners within Salvation Army, some of the forms have literally got a couple of lines written on them. That is unbelievable in the year 2019. You know, there's literally more information having to be put on parking tickets than that. So we are seriously failing the victims by completing the forms or just seeing it as a form that's filled in. Somebody's life literally rests on that. And the other thing that's very much underused and often not spoken about is the reconsideration. If as a first responder you disagree with the negative conclusive grounds, you are able to request a reconsideration. And it would be interesting to see nationally how many reconsiderations have actually been made by first responders. So I could speak for a long time, or a lot longer, but I will now hand over to Karen Saunders, one of our key partners from Public Health England.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, Karen Saunders here from Public Health England. I work in the Health and Wellbeing team in the West Midlands in Birmingham. It's great. There's a number of people in the room with us watching this live webinar. It's very exciting. And we're expecting more people at 10 o'clock for our networking event. So if you are around in Birmingham City Centre, do pop in and see us. You've been sent the details. Before we begin, I just need to say again, heartfelt thanks to Nicola, our technician and project manager, for this week-long awareness raising campaign, which has been absolutely phenomenal, highly successful. So thank you. Freya for her brilliant project support and admin support. All the speakers who have been wonderful and have left us with some fantastic resources which we'll be sharing with you afterwards. Nicola is evaluating each event, so we are looking at what difference this has made and how successful it's been. And our events are never ends in themselves. They always lead to further work and action, as Robin will testify. So we will be looking at what more work we can do in partnership through multi-agency approaches as we move forward. And we've already done quite a few things already, so highly successful. So I'm going to talk about our public health approach to identifying, preventing and disrupting modern slavery in the West Midlands. Okay, just a little bit about Public Health England if you don't know who we are. We're civil servants who work to protect and improve the nation's health and, importantly, address health inequalities, for which we have a legal duty with the Secretary of State for Health. We are the authoritative leader in public health, and we provide expert advice, support, tools and resources across the system, particularly with our local authorities, but increasingly with the NHS and voluntary sector. Within Public Health England, we have what we call a public health approach, which really comprises what we've got in that circle there, which is around systems, leadership and advocacy, building networks and relationships and partnerships, skills and capacity building, learning, and evidence-based and data-led approaches. And what we found working with the West Midlands Anti-Slavery Network and wider partners is this public health approach fits perfectly with modern slavery priorities. And there's been work published where the work that we've done in the West Midlands with Robin et al. Has been highlighted as excellent practice in terms of taking a public health, preventative, upstream, multi-agency approach to modern slavery challenges. This is just a framework to further reinforce how Public Health England in the West Midlands works. It is through places and through partnerships. One of our vulnerable populations that we focus on in terms of our inclusion, health and health inequalities priorities is modern slavery, along with homeless people, prison leavers and people in the prison system, vulnerable migrants, etc. And we do that in concert with our NHS partners, our voluntary sector partners, looking not just at lifestyle factors, but wider determinants of health. Again, really important in terms of this agenda. So, when did the journey really start? Well, I muscled my way into the West Midlands Anti-Slavery Network when it was the Trafficking Network, actually. And I sat around the table thinking, what's this got to do with public health or the public's health? And in my first meeting, my head was going crazy with ideas. And I thought, yeah, I know why I'm around this table. And so I've harassed Robin and colleagues ever since, and really sort of made sure that we claim our space from a public health perspective. And in 2016, that's quite a while ago now, isn't it, Robin? We had a really excellent joint event which was sponsored and contributed to by all those partners, the logos across the top of the slide. And really that kick-started, provided impotence for the excellent partnership work and collaborative work that we've done since. And we got ourselves in the paper with health chiefs taking on modern slavery. So one of our directors of public health actually was interviewed by a local newspaper. And I think it just really raised the profile, the understanding and the awareness of the importance of the health sector playing their part in this agenda. So what have we been doing to date? What have we achieved so far? Lots around partnerships and networks, which, as Robin says, is absolutely crucial. We're a key member, well, I hope we're a key member of the West Midlands Anti-Slavery Network, the Panel for Protecting Vulnerable People, NHS England's National Modern Slavery Network, which is really taking off, and they're coming to present to the West Midlands Network in November, which is a great link, and I'm sure there's going to be further work that we can do together with NHS colleagues. And also we played a significant role in shaping some of the training materials that the Home Office have produced at national level and connected in our health resources in respect of that. I think we're really good at networking and system connection, and I think this week really shows how we've co-produced a programme that embraces a whole range of priorities and really puts health and wellbeing and health inequalities central to that. We also take a life course approach, and you will have heard on the radio this morning, as well as Zoe Ball reminding us on Radio 2 that it was Anti-Slavery Awareness Day. There was news coverage of the awful county line situation, but also the great news that the police are really sort of getting their heads around this and tackling it. So we're really interested in doing more around that. Child sexual exploitation, and also there's some really important links that we can make with our violence prevention work. And we continue to do collaborative work with the West Midlands Police, and it's been a pleasure to work with Jason this week to co-produce some of this content. As an expert authoritative public health agency, of course, we will focus on data, evidence and resources, and we've worked hard to share intelligence and data across partners to identify high-risk groups. We've done some work around supply chains, and we've done some joint research with Westminster University and the Anti-Slavery Network, and published a piece in the Journal of Public Health around a particularly vulnerable group of high prevalence trafficked Romanian women. And effective practice, we're always looking for good practice examples, and there are many. And if you listened into Jim Crawshaw's session, he highlighted a couple of excellent examples of good work that are happening across the West Midlands, Solihull and Sandwell. But there's also lots of other examples, and we're really promoting something called Making Every Contact Count, which is really about, if someone's talking to a professional, in contact with a professional, don't just think about one need, but think about the whole person and their wider needs. So I think that's really important, and that's something that we shared as part of our training resources as well. And it was really heartening that we were included, the West Midlands work was included in National Public Health England's Adding Values case studies. So Robin shared that through the network, and we were really pleased that our good work was recognised as exemplar. And also capacity building this week has been a superb example of joint working to upskill, raise awareness and share resources and tools. We've run a number of interprofessional learning sessions over the past month. We've raised awareness of understanding of modern slavery amongst our own staff, and Robin has talked to our staff about spotting the signs. So lots and lots of things that have gone on in terms of joint work to raise awareness and understanding and continuing professional development activities. I also volunteer at the Safe House, and I'm looking forward to my first stint there, which is going to be very interesting, should I say, but also a way in which I can add value as an individual. And then finally, the work that we've been doing with Barnardo's and Jason from West Midlands Police, which is maternity settings where we think we can do more to spot the signs of trafficking, where Barnardo's have spotted that there's a high numbers of young, vulnerable Romanian girls, often accompanied by another person, an uncle and aunt, hospital hopping really to claim benefits, saying things like it's their first pregnancy when it's clearly not. And this is just harrowing and awful. So we are working with our maternity colleagues to raise awareness of how they might spot the signs and what to do if they think they've encountered a victim. And that was featured at our annual conference this year. I was going to hand over to Rachel Hopper, but Robin's going to be Rachel Hopper because her daughter is poorly. So I'm going to give my headphones back to Robin.
Okay, so at 5 to 9, I heard that Rachel couldn't attend, so I will do my best for Barnardo's and Rachel because they do an absolutely amazing job. Just before I do start on the presentation, I do need to say that I mentioned all the many partnerships that exist across all force areas in the UK, but the National Network Coordinators Forum under the Human Trafficking Foundation brings many, not all, of those coordinators together on a quarterly basis to share good practice and exchange information and resources and speak about topics such as the national referral mechanism and digitalisation of it and some of the complex issues that we're currently facing. But I also need to say thank you very much to Mark Burns-Williamson and his setting up of the national PCCs, modern slavery human trafficking network. That has been absolutely essential. It does bring, and it is a place, it brings all the PCCs together and the national toolkit that they were given on modern slavery. But it also means for all the partnerships to escalate some of the challenges we face, and then from there Mark can feed those into the Home Office and the Independent Anti-Slavery Commissioner, etc. And I think that is a link into Rachel's work on Barnardo's, because I also manage a partnership in Cleveland, and what we see is that clearly trafficking and exploitation looks different in each part of the country, and it's very hard to understand the local picture without multi-agency partnerships. And going back some while in the West Midlands, we probably unconsciously veered towards adults, and we realized that the number of partners on the network who were looking and dealing with child trafficking was extremely low, and that's where we first linked into Rebecca Griffiths from Barnardo's, and they brought a whole new perspective to the network and brought in that child exploitation. And even in the last few years, trafficking of children has changed very much. Had a very good presentation the other day from somebody from St Giles Trust, and the lady who presented, I think she said she was 35, and she said she was a victim of county lines when she was 14. So, you know, literally within our own organisations and statutory sector, we've only been speaking about it 2 or 3 years. It has been going on for many, many years, and we're just starting to understand the complexities of exploitation of children. So, Barnardo's and their National Counter-Trafficking Service and They have also got the Independent Child Trafficking Advocate pilots, the ICTIGs, and within the West Midlands, Panel for Protection of Trafficked Children. So the PCC in the West Midlands supports wholly the West Midlands Anti-Slavery Network and the Panel for Protection of Trafficked Children. And I think without that political support nationally, this is a very hard agenda to address. And I think the PCCs, some of the best work going on is supported by PCCs. So the ICTIG service exists in Greater Manchester, East Midlands, West Midlands, Croydon, Hampshire, and the Isle of Wight, and the whole of Wales. Some of the partners of Barnardo's, I don't believe people see the slides today. Some can, but so for those who can't, some of their partners include Modern Slavery Transformation Programme, the local authorities here within the West Midlands, the NHS, Liberate, which on my first slide, Liberate is the West Midlands response to modern slavery, National Crime Agency, ourselves, DWP, and the Regional Organised Crime Unit. The Independent Child Trafficking Guardianship Service, Section 48 Modern Slavery Act 2015. So it's a Home Office funded project, and the early adopter sites I spoke of earlier, and it came into being in the West Midlands from the 18th of October 2018. So the ICTIG role, which is basically direct work with trafficked children, advocacy and support for child navigating systems, specialist trafficking support to professionals, including national referral mechanism, safety planning, accommodation, decision-making, immigration process. Just before I finish on that slide, I kind of link that back to what I said in my presentation, and that is having this multi-agency discussion. Apologies, Rachel, I'm going off on a tangent here, but I would like to kind of say about this kind of the importance of the multi-agency discussion with all partner agencies, local authorities, health and law enforcement before we complete the NRM forms. And I think that may go some way to address the issues that we are perhaps having with county lines and Section 45 defence, ensuring that we have all the information from all those different authorities, different sectors, before we put pen to paper on the NRM. So the ICTIGs also are represented at all the key meetings in respect of children, and I think that Rachel and her team have done a tremendous job of linking into children's services and local authorities across the West Midlands, and as a consequence of their findings, they've done some tremendous work, as Karen mentioned, with health and the NHS. So a key role is to upskill professionals to recognise and respond to trafficking, particularly internal trafficking. As we know from the National Referral Mechanism, UK nationals are #1 on the NRM for the past year, and clearly that is in relation to children and British nationals being trafficked internally. They have casework, indirect advocacy and support, training and awareness. Rachel and Barnardo's and the PPTC has done a fabulous job of raising awareness within those organisations, because I think kind of linking that back, the NRM came in 2009, and with much of the publications and processes that do come out, sometimes there's no identifiable means in which that's disseminated to frontline staff. So we do still see, not just here in the West Midlands, but elsewhere nationally, there are still some frontline staff that are unaware of the complex issues of child trafficking and the complexities of the National Referral Mechanism. And in some cases, I suspect that the NRM isn't being completed when it really should be, particularly to children. And again, they attend key strategic and operational meetings, apart from today. So some of the trends and themes, as I said, we're constantly learning, and what the team have seen here, and I'm certain that this will exist across the UK, and it's important for them to be sharing this information, and that's the exploitation of Roma children. And identifying means of which we kind of address that. How do we address that? How do we work with local authorities? How do we work with the NHS and the education services? Multiple forms of exploitation, children, Roma children being exploited for criminal purposes, and there is a certain amount of confusion and anxiety about how to safeguard the children and their families, because as been mentioned, I'm sure this week, that a lot of this work is about safeguarding vulnerable people. They've also seen high levels of missing for Vietnamese children, debt bondage and control mechanisms, and lack of cultural understanding. That kind of links to, I was speaking to Amber Cagney, our development manager, the other day, and she has just set up our place of safety here in the West Midlands, and she did work for City Hearts as a safe house manager, and she was saying the other day the importance of completing the NRM, but if the victim actually says a certain phrase, it's important that you use that phrase specifically on the NRM, because if you don't, if you start to ad lib and put your own interpretation of it down, and then somebody asks them about it at a later date, it could be misconstrued as that they're lying or not telling the truth or being deceitful, when in fact it's our responsibility to actually write it down word for word, the phrases and words that they use. And I kind of think that is linked to Rachel's point there about a lack of cultural understanding. And I think it's important for us to identify, how do we include the cultural understanding into the work that we do? So trends and themes, Rachel's next slide, re-trafficking and exploitation at the point of transition. That's something that is spoken about a lot. 17.5 years plus, asylum decisions and debt bondage, reduce support by agencies. I was at a conference in Cleveland this week, and can't remember the person's name, but they basically said, and they were super forward thinking, and they were saying, why not, before the child drops off the cliff at 17.5 plus, why not start linking adult services in with them at an early stage? And it's certainly not my area of expertise, but that seems so much common sense. Exploitation of Afghan boys within the United Kingdom, that's something that Bernardo's and the PPTC are seeing. Criminal exploitation of forced labour, varied grooming methods, and links made in Calais. And also for sexual exploitation, we sometimes naively think that sexual exploitation is purely a female phenomenon, but it's not the first time this week that I've heard sexual exploitation for males and for male children as well. And I certainly know that Julia Thomas from the Passage in London has seen that with some of the people that she cares for. Okay, I am told that my time is up, so thank you very much.